Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respects to elders both past and present of the Kulin Nation and extend respect to other Indigenous people present and online. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals 2022 Annual General Meeting. As we have a quorum present, I declare the 2022 AGM open. I'm Paul Rennie, Chairman of the company and Managing Director of Paradigm. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of the people here in the room today, and thank you for coming, and also extend a welcome to those shareholders who are participating via the online platform. Before we get into the details of the meeting, I would like to just make a special mention to one of our long-term supporters, Kevin Hollingsworth. Kevin was our company secretary, and he was a great supporter of the company, a very good friend. And unfortunately, this August, he suffered 9 months with cancer and passed away. And I'd just like to extend a note of thanks to Kevin for all of his service towards the company. In terms of today's presentation, I will be introducing my fellow board of directors, and I'll also be presenting with Dr. Skerrett an update on our development plans, and then we'll get into the formal part of the meeting, the voting on the 10 resolutions set out in our notice of meeting. So I'll start with the introduction to my fellow directors. On the screen, you can see Dr. Donna Skerrett. Donna's an Executive Director of the company and also our Chief Medical Officer. And to my left, starting at the left, is John Gaffney. John is a Non-Executive Director, been with the company since we listed in 2015. Next to John is Helen Fisher. Helen has been with us since February 2021 and is also Chair of our Audit and Risk Committee. And next to Helen is Amos Melcher, a Non-Executive Director, been with the company for nearly 2 years now, I think. So that's our Board of Directors. I also like to welcome Abby McNish, who's our Company Secretary. Abby was going to be here in person, but unfortunately she has come down with COVID, so she is attending online, and we'll see her a bit later, and we hope that she gets well soon. And we have some people here from the company. We have Simon White, Head of our Investor Relations, and a number of other staff. I see Carla and Beverly, Andrew, and I'm not sure if there's Justin. Justin's our CFO, but I think he was going to try and be here. He is here. There he is over in the other corner. I was looking down this side. Hi, Justin, our CFO. Also online, we have Rafael Murillo Mandana. Sorry, Rafa. Rafa is online. He's our auditor, and he's online because he too has COVID. So we hope Rafa gets well soon. And Amy Whittington is here, our auditor as well. So Rafa and Amy will be able to answer any questions in relation to the auditor's report. We also have Andrew Gaffney from K&L Gates. Andrew is our corporate lawyer. I think he may have just, here he is at the front row. Sorry. Okay, in terms of today's meeting is being held online via the Computershare meeting platform. This allows shareholders, proxies and guests to attend the meeting by the electronic platform. All attendees can watch a live webcast of the meeting. In addition, shareholders and proxies have the ability to ask questions and submit votes. In terms of how to ask a question, you can see here on your screen, and you can see on your screen at your office or home. There is a Q&A icon across the top of the screen. Select that icon, and then you'll see at the bottom of the screen, you can select a topic and then type your question. So please note you can now submit any questions, but I will not necessarily be able to address them until we arrive at the relevant time in the meeting. And also note your questions may be moderated If we receive multiple questions on the same topic, they'll be amalgamated into one question. If we run out of time to answer your questions, we will endeavour to answer them in due course by email. To ask a verbal question from here in the room, please erase your voting card and then state your name, and we'll take your question. I'm now going to present a short presentation on the I will now present a short update presentation and an opportunity for general questions and answers on the performance of the company before moving to the formal aspects of the AGM. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We should have our standard disclaimer, and we'll move to the next slide after our disclaimer. Thank you. Okay, so this is the executive team of Paradigm. As I mentioned before, Dr. Donna Skerrett is an executive director. Donna also holds the role of chief medical officer. Across the bottom, we have Dr. Ravi Krishnan, who's our chief scientific officer and been with the company since we listed, and is largely in charge of our R&D pursuits. And as I mentioned before, Justin Cahill, who's our chief financial officer. Now, some people may note that from the executive team, Marco Pelosi is missing. I'd like to let everyone know that Marco has stepped down from the company and is transitioning from the company, and his last days will be in February 2020. As a shareholder, you may ask some questions in relation to this. One question may be, did the Paradigm board follow best practice in the appointment of Marco? So what I would like to say to that question is absolutely yes. The company followed best practice by engaging with an international search firm, Korn Ferry, one of the largest search firms worldwide. They undertook an extensive search on our brief, and we had a 6-month review process of all the candidates. We did, as a board, we interviewed each candidate twice. We also had Korn Ferry do reference checks, and we also had psych tests undertaken. So we believe that we ticked all of the boxes in terms of selection of the candidate. So shareholders should feel very comfortable that we did go through that due process. Another question shareholders may have is, have the fundamentals of the company changed with or without Marco being present in the business? And I can say that the fundamentals of the company have not changed, and this is a very exciting period for the company. We currently have a global phase 3 clinical trial underway, where we are recruiting in the United States, in Canada, in the UK, and soon to be in Europe, of course also including Australia. We have a number of phase 2 studies underway. We have the phase 2 study in osteoarthritis, which is our 008 study. And that is a study looking at disease modification in people with osteoarthritis, taking synovial fluid from their affected joint and assaying it, looking at disease markers either on patients with the placebo or patients with PPS. We also have 2 phase 2s underway for our MPS program. We have an MPS 1 study being conducted at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide, looking at MPS 1 patients being treated with our drug PPS. In addition to that, we have a large phase 2, and I say large phase 2, in rare diseases is not the sort of numbers that you'd see in the general population, but a large phase 2 for MPS being undertaken in Brazil. And that is a double-blind placebo-controlled study. So in rare diseases, it's very unusual to have double-blind placebo-controlled studies. And there's reasons for that, but this is a double-blind placebo-controlled study. People are waiting anxiously to see that data. It will be very informative and should be quite significant for the MPS program moving forward. So the fundamentals have not changed. We are still continuing to develop fantastic clinical data, and we also have a number of commercial companies who are now seeing the real value in what Paradigm are doing and asking very detailed, specific questions. They're in our data room. We have signed in recent times over probably, Beverly, you can remind me, maybe 30 NDAs, companies wanting to get in and review our data. So the fundamentals are well and truly in place. Paradigm is moving forward at a great rate of knots. So these are the key milestones looking back to financial year 2022. So you know that our IND was open for our phase 3 clinical trial. In addition to that, we also received fast track designation granted by the US FDA. And you may say, what is a fast track designation? So the FDA has put in place a number of programs that basically look to expedite the review of drugs that treat a serious condition for which there is an unmet medical need. So this is the FDA saying that osteoarthritis is a serious condition, and at the same time, the FDA is saying there is a real unmet medical need in the treatment of osteoarthritis. And just as an aside, just this past week, we saw a report coming out from the Radiological Society of the United States saying that they have observed patients over a 4-year period, those patients receiving non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. I think most people will know the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are often first line in the treatment of osteoarthritis. The report stated that those subjects who were receiving non-steroidal anti-inflammatories had a much larger degradation of their joints compared to those subjects who did not receive non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So it's making the choices for doctors more and more difficult in terms of how do you avoid destroying the joint with certain products. We know that corticosteroids have been implicated in that for many years. So the opportunity for a safe and effective medication to treat the pain and the joint dysfunction of people with osteoarthritis is a significant one. And I can say at this point in time, Paradigm is proceeding very nicely with our phase 3 program, which Dr. Skerrett will talk about. So that fast track designation is a recognition by the US FDA. Osteoarthritis is a serious condition, and also there's an unmet medical need. We're actively screening and enrolling participants in the United States, Australia, UK, Canada, and Europe. We have a globally harmonised clinical program, and that will support a number of important aspects for a clinical development company. So a harmonised clinical program means we can obtain registration in multiple jurisdictions. That's very important. So you can roll out the product in jurisdictions without having years of having to go back and start a program in a separate jurisdiction like Europe, for example. We're able to harmonise that and start and finish those programs pretty much at the same time. We also believe we'll have a broad label claim on our product, which will maximise reimbursement price and market penetration from launch. Looking back to financial year 2022, in regards to our MPS program, the phase 2 clinical trial commenced evaluating the safety and tolerability of PPS compared to placebo. That's the Brazilian study I mentioned before. And we're presenting interim 6-month data at the International Congress of Inborn Errors of Metabolism. So again, the peers within the MPS family have decided that this is a significant development warranting further discussion at their annual international meetings. In terms of the company, we continue to develop our pipeline. You would have seen announcements around our heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, major unmet medical need, and also ARDS. We continue to develop our partnership with the NFL Alumni Health, looking to bring in as many of the ex-NFL players into our phase 3 program as possible. And we are actively engaged in discussions with potential partners, which I'll touch on a bit more when I get through to my section of the presentation. But for now, I'll hand over to Dr. Skerrett, who will take us through the update on osteoarthritis and MPS. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to all present at this meeting for the opportunity to share our progress with the programs at Paradigm. Next slide, please. As you've heard, the osteoarthritis program is now a global phase 3 program. We have successfully opened sites in many jurisdictions and have others that are in the process of being open now. We are enrolling patients in the US, Australia, and UK, and Canada will be soon. We also, as you can see on the slide, have a number of sites in Europe that will also participate in this study. And as you have heard, our strategy for this has been to meet with regulators in many different jurisdictions, find out what their requirements are for registration for the study, and then through the design of the clinical trial, the pivotal study, Para-002, and a subsequent confirmatory study, to meet those registration requirements so that we will be able to register and then launch in multiple areas at the same time. At this point, we have about 61 sites that are active around the globe. Those sites are mostly in the US, but we also have a number of sites in Australia and the UK. And as I mentioned, Canada will soon be on board. And by having sites, this many sites active now, obviously it facilitates recruitment and enrollment, but it also allows us to proceed into our next study, the confirmatory study, once we've completed the dose selection phase of the current Para-002 study. May I have the next slide, please? So our key objectives for the fiscal year 23 are stated on this slide. We have coming up in December the first formal review by the Data and Safety Monitoring Board for the Para-002 Phase 3 pivotal study. And this DSMB meeting will review and evaluate accumulated data from the study. We're in stage 1 of the study where we are looking at several different doses compared to placebo control. And the DSMB is not only instrumental in monitoring that study, but they also have a very strategic role along with our guidelines for selection of the dose. We're very much looking forward to the DSMB review and report in December. Following that, in the first half of calendar year 23, we look forward to completing the recruitment for stage 1 of the study. As I mentioned, the aim of that is to identify the minimal effective dose of PPS that will be carried into the stage 2 of this study, and then also used in the confirmatory studies and any other studies we will conduct later related to osteoarthritis and PPS use. We're undertaking a number of activities to accelerate recruitment of Para-002 to ensure we stay close to the timeline for completion of these studies and regulatory submissions. Some of those recent activities include protocol modification to reduce patient and site burden. We have frequent interaction with our clinical sites, and we've taken in the feedback from the investigators about which aspects of the study may be burdensome for sites and for patients. And we've worked very closely with our key opinion leaders and our consultants to the study to make the study as feasible as possible for patients and sites. And these changes have been received very nicely, and so we're looking forward to having even more patients enroll in the study. We're also increasing the total number of sites. We initially planned for this study to be in the US and Australia, and we quickly realized after many months of interaction with the FDA that it would be best for us to open this as a globally harmonized program. We're continuing to increase the number of sites in order to keep the enrollment rates up. And we're doing that by a number of means. We can increase the number of sites, but then we also need to know where the patients are coming from who will be funneled into those sites. And that activity is the objective of a number of recruitment and retention activities that are ongoing. And as a little bit of a background on this particular aspect of clinical trial activity, recruitment initially is approached through the sites, through the investigators who look for eligible patients in their own and regional patient databases. But there are many other successful recruitment tools that can help patients, especially those with a chronic disease, keep the number of patients flowing into sites. And this can be approached by broad advertising, much of that being done through social media. It can also be approached through targeted advertising in specific areas where patients with these conditions may be found, again, mostly over social media, but also sometimes radio and magazines. There are also companies that specialize in the targeted recruitment, and we are working with a targeted recruitment company as well as our general advertising company. And there are also companies that acquire clinical trial ready communities in that sense. And so we're also working with a group that undertakes that activity, that reaches out to patients, educates them around clinical trials, and has a data set of patients who they can go through to then help identify even more patients to enroll in our study. So it's really through a number of different aspects that now that we have so many sites set up, that we continue the task of funneling patients into these sites in order to rapidly enroll these studies and move on to stage 2 after the dose selection. If I may have the next slide, please. So in terms of our activity around disease modification, by way of background, the current phase 3 program has the primary endpoint of pain and function. And it is those endpoints that were discussed with the regulators, and the design of those studies is such that those are the target outcomes by which we will judge success of the current studies. But as you've heard and we know from experience and from the literature, that PPS has mechanistic activities that suggest it also may be very important as a disease-modifying agent for osteoarthritis. There are no disease-modifying agents available at this point, and based on the recent data from Para-008, which we've shared with the market, as well as some signals from a prior randomized control study that we conducted in osteoarthritis, we've received some signals from these controlled studies that PPS has some disease-modifying potential. We previously saw evidence that PPS reduced the size of bone marrow lesions. These are lesions associated with pain and also known to be associated with more rapid progression of osteoarthritis. And then in our recent study, we wanted to look at synovial fluid biomarkers. We're delivering this drug by systemic delivery. It's a subcutaneous injection. And so one of the questions is, well, if you're giving this by systemic therapy, what is it actually doing in the knee? And the way to address that, one of the ways to address that is to look at the fluid in the knee. And that's what we reported at the top line results of day 56 of this Para-008 study, which showed us that multiple biomarkers measured in the synovial fluid had favorable profiles compared to placebo control. And so this is some very important insight to mechanisms of PPS in the knee and showing differences compared to control patients. We also demonstrated in that study that clinically we saw statistically significant improvements at day 56 and in a number of clinical parameters measured by WOMAC scores for the twice weekly arm compared to placebo. So what are our next steps in terms of understanding more about disease modification and PPS? We will have 6-month data coming out within the next few months, and we will analyze those data and look at the data from both day 56, the top line data, as well as 6-month data to understand more about mechanistic pathways, disease modification, and longer-term outcomes. And these data will be discussed not only for the purposes of peer-reviewed publication, but also for some very important regulatory discussions around what the regulatory pathway for a disease-modifying drug will look like. And we expect to have those discussions with the FDA and Europe. We intend to use our feedback from those discussions, as well as our total understanding of disease modification and PPS, to consider the TGA provisional approval application and the specific timing of that application once we've had the FDA discussions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just a little bit about the MPS program, because this is also a very exciting indication. Next slide. As you've heard, this is a very rare disease. It's associated with inflammation and ongoing musculoskeletal pain in patients who have been treated with primary therapy, which is either enzyme replacement therapy or bone marrow transplantation. The mucopolysaccharidosis are very serious diseases, which are usually diagnosed very early in life and are very often fatal. So primary treatment with bone marrow transplant and or replacement therapy with enzymes is life-saving. However, those treatments do leave a medical void in that there's ongoing inflammation in the joints, and patients suffer with arthropathies, musculoskeletal pain, and difficulty functioning. Paradigm has achieved orphan designation through both the FDA and EMA for our evaluation of PPS in the mucopolysaccharide programs, MPS 1 and MPS 6. As you've heard, we've obtained clinical data from MPS 1 through a study in Australia. These are patients who have undergone a transplant and still have those residual musculoskeletal problems with pain and function. There's been a lot of interest in this study, and we will have a presentation of these data as we receive additional follow-up this year at the metabolism meeting, which you'll hear about later. We also are looking at MPS 6 in a study in Brazil, and this patient population is a little different. MPS 6 patients are treated with enzyme replacement therapy. And we are able to do a double-blind placebo-controlled trial with 12 subjects there. It sounds like a small number of patients, but as you've heard, for an orphan indication, a controlled trial of 12 subjects provides very meaningful data for understanding the effects of a drug on key primary and secondary endpoints. And we are looking at many different age ranges in this program because, as I've mentioned, this is often presented at birth or early childhood. And so the use of PPS in MPS diseases will apply to both children and adults with residual musculoskeletal disease with PPS. So both of these programs are the subject of much interest on the business development side, as well as the medical and scientific community. Next slide, please. So our key objectives for the MPS program for this fiscal year are: for the MPS 1 program, the data for this phase 2 study will be presented at the lysosomal storage disease in 2023, and will cover information on pain, function, urinary GAG levels or markers of disease, as well as change in biomarkers. And we'll be working on the preparation for completion of that study and final data readout in fiscal year 23. For the MPS 6 program, we're working on completing the recruitment for this study. We also are looking forward to a poster presentation by our lead investigator, Dr. Roberto Giuliani, and this will take place in the spring of this year. And the endpoint evaluation and feasibility assessment for potential phase 3 program will in large part be based on the data that we derive from this MPS study. So this is a little snapshot just of the objectives for the fiscal year for OA as well as the MPS program. And with that, next slide, please, and I will hand back to Paul.
Thank you very much, Donna. Very comprehensive update. Thank you. I would also, if I could, just add to what Donna said in relation to the MPS study. We have completed a phase 2 MPS study in patients who were treated with the underlying treatment of enzyme replacement therapy. We did that in conjunction with the Mount Sinai School of Medicine and also the University in Mainz. The study was conducted in Germany, and we found very positive results on all of those subjects who were treated with PPS as well as their enzyme replacement therapy. And that paper is published, first author Henneman, and it showed significant reduction in pain in those subjects, significant improvement in range of motion, but also significant reduction in their GAG levels, which is very important to the long-term health of these subjects. So that was a very good study, and we're looking to see the results of these 2 MPS studies in the very near future. I'm now going to provide a company update. Next slide, please. So just to remind everyone, Paradigm Biopharmaceuticals has a very comprehensive and well-protected asset. As you know, PPS is a very complex molecule consisting of up to 70 molecules within the one molecule defined as PPS, or 70 sub-units, if you like. And each of those subunits need to be in the same proportion to one another, batch after batch. And that is a requirement by all of the regulators, that there's a consistency in manufacturing process. And at this point in time, Bene Pharmachem still remains the only FDA-approved supplier for PPS for human use. So we have the second here, the yellow indicates we have an exclusive supply agreement with Bene Pharmachem, 25 years from registration, that Bene Pharmachem exclusively supply their drug to Paradigm for our indications which we're pursuing. And on top of that level of protection, we also have a number of patents around the use of pentazan polysulfate sodium. I'm sure many of you are aware of some of the patents. We have patents around severe osteoarthritis, heart failure, viral arthritis, the respiratory diseases of allergic rhinitis, allergic asthma, COPD, also MPS, of course, which we licensed those patents in from Mount Sinai, bone marrow lesions, pulmonary fibrosis, psoriasis, ARDS, and arthroplasty, pain after a arthroplasty procedure. So we do have a significant portfolio of patents, and those patents continue to be developed by our R&D team, and will continue to build the level of protection around this asset. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of business development, I can let everyone know that we're working with 2 very experienced business development partners. The first is Plexus Ventures. We have signed an agreement with Plexus, which is a leading global business development company, and basically all of the people in the organisation are experienced top-tier pharmaceutical executives. Some of the people have worked with the very biggest of the biggest big pharma companies in very senior roles for many, many years, sometimes 20 or 30 years with companies like Lilly and Pfizer. So they have established contacts and knowledge of those companies. And they are assisting us with outreach to the senior people at pharma companies. They do have a very strong track record of deal success. They have actually helped quite a number of companies find commercial partners, both big and small. Plexus is focusing on basically global partnering activities outside of China. So we have excluded China, and you'll see that that's addressed in the next point. So they have commenced a process where we are currently asking pharma companies to do their diligence by a particular point in time. And then once we have the results back from those companies, they ask us questions. We have a team of experts on their subjects ready and waiting to answer those questions. And then at a particular point, we'll be asking all of those people, once they finish their diligence, to put a non-binding term sheet to Paradigm, and we will then start discussions with each of those companies, but all of the companies are aware that this process is going on, and the idea is to try and develop some competitive tension so that companies understand that they're not the only company that we're talking to. We're actually talking to many companies at one time. We have a similar approach in China. Angel Pond is headed by people, Chinese nationals who work in the United States. They have helped many American pharma companies find partners in the Chinese market, and they are helping us with introductions to the top 15 pharma companies in China, with specific introductions to the presidents or heads of commercial projects, and that process is going very well. We are looking primarily to do an agreement with a Chinese company over the marketing and distribution for xylosol, the product for osteoarthritis. MPS is not very prevalent in China. The main hotspots in terms of prevalence of the disease are the Middle East and North Africa and Brazil, and also Turkey. They're the major hotspots for where we see this sort of larger number of these MPS patients. So we don't have a focus in China on MPS. Our focus is on osteoarthritis, and there has been quite a number of examples of pharma companies doing deals. There was a company before us that did a deal at the end of phase 2, which produced a nice outcome for that company. But as time went on, they went into phase 3, and that product failed. So that deal has now sort of fallen away, but it did have some interesting metrics for us to consider when transacting with Chinese companies. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple of key points I'd like to mention here is that Paradigm has been invited to a number of very significant conferences. These are significant conferences in that it gets Paradigm in front of some of the big pharma companies around the world. Of course, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference is coming up in 6 to 7 weeks' time. We have presented at Evercore, the Truist Life Science Conference. So these are very large US funds and banks. Goldman Sachs, of course. We have also presented at BioEurope and international partnering conferences. We presented at the Bell Potter Healthcare Conference, the MST Access, and other broker healthcare conferences in Australia. Publications, we have this last year published 2 publications. If you're watching the scientific journals, you'll see that we did publish a paper on CHIKV, which is the alpha virus, and that was accepted. And we have also published a paper over the use of PPS and its ability to block the COVID vaccine from, the COVID virus from attaching to the receptor on the cells. That work was done by our collaborators in Italy, and both of those pieces of work are seminal and very important, and have been peer-reviewed and published. So I think the point for investors, we'll come on to another slide in a minute, is that we do publish our clinical data, and we will be talking about that in a second. But it's, I think, very important for shareholders to understand that this information is getting out there on the public stage, whether through conferences or publications. We do have a number of upcoming presentations at very key conferences during Q1 calendar year 2023. JP Morgan Global Healthcare Conference. So a number of the companies that we're talking to now will be attending JP Morgan, giving us another opportunity for another face-to-face meeting, talking to those companies about their questions or their feedback from their diligence, which they're currently conducting. We also have MPS 1 data presentation at the lysosomal storage disease in January. We also have MPS 6 data being presented at the World Symposia Conference in Orlando, Florida in February 2023. And also we have submitted to ORSI, that's the Osteoarthritis Research Scientific International Conference, which is the World Congress on Osteoarthritis. This is where big pharma companies often go to see the latest developments in scientific research into osteoarthritis. So this is a very key conference, and the subject matter for that conference will be shown, I think, on the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, so the third and fourth points are listed here. We are developing an OA manuscript following the day 56 para 008 data, which is the study that Dr. Skerrett spoke about, which is what's happening inside the joint. This is the synovial fluid biomarker data. So we have a manuscript that we hope to have published, and we're currently preparing that manuscript. Should be ready next month in December. It then goes out to journals around the globe. And the fourth point is the OA manuscript following the 6-month para 008 data. So this is where we'll have a follow-up to the day 56 data, again looking at the biomarkers, but also looking inside the joint, this time through advanced MRI imaging. And all the way along the line, of course, we're doing clinical outcomes, looking at pain and function in subjects throughout the study. So those two very important pieces of data, and I would like to extend a very sincere thank you to Dr. Skerrett and her clinical team, and also Dr. Ravi Krishnan and his R&D team for delivering that 008 data on time and on budget, because from a commercial perspective, those data have created an absolute excitement around what Paradigm are doing with big, medium and small pharma companies alike. This is really groundbreaking data. Talking to big pharma companies, they have said they've never seen anything like this, never seen biomarkers, disease biomarkers in the joint going down, whereas the disease biomarkers in the placebo group going up. So in other words, these biomarkers are actually decreasing in the subjects with PPS. And at the same time, we're seeing clinical outcomes correlating with those biomarker data. So we're actually seeing pain improvement, we're seeing joint improvement and function improvement, and PGIC, which is the patient global impression of change improvement. And these are just remarkable data, and it's making our job in the commercial discussions so much easier with such quality data. So thanks to Donna and thanks to Ravi. Also, as Dr. Skerrett mentioned, we do have a number of activities to accelerate the phase 3 clinical trial program. There's probably no one in the room who doesn't understand the importance of getting our phase 3 clinical trial finished and on time. As a sponsor of a trial that's going globally, we need to constantly look at our recruitment rates and constantly look at ways that we can improve those rates, because the sooner we get to the finish of phase 3, the sooner we get into discussions with the FDA, the sooner we get registration for the product, and the sooner we get to those potential blockbuster revenues. So it's a very key focus for everyone at Paradigm to make sure that we get those recruitment rates moving as fast and as quickly as possible. And we also have another key milestone, which is commercial in confidence, and it will be hopefully part of a presentation to shareholders throughout the year or at our next AGM, which will be in relation to commercial partnering. Next slide, please. So in terms of expected news flow, we have ticked off some already. We have mentioned that we've commenced the 006, which is the extension study. We have also received a tax rebate of $7.4 million, reminding everyone our cash was around $94 million at the end of September quarter. So that's a very useful addition to our cash balance. Dr. Skerrett mentioned that we will be having this is Para 002, our phase 3 clinical trial update, our first data safety monitoring review with a timeframe of calendar year 2022. So before the end of this calendar year, we'll have a response for all shareholders as to how that meeting went. We are not expecting any major issues. We monitor safety constantly throughout the trial, and at this point in time, I think we're confident that that meeting should go very well. The MPS 6 phase 2 clinical trial, we hope to announce next month as well that it's 100% recruited. And once recruited, obviously, we can then do the necessary follow-up and then read out the data thereafter. At the end of Q1, a very important milestone for the company, Para-008, 6-month data. As I mentioned before, this is not only synovial fluid biomarkers and pain and function, but it also looks inside the joint with MRI to look at the status of the cartilage and also the underlying bone and, of course, the synovial tissue. So this is a look inside the joint to see how those PPS subjects are going compared to placebo. Also, the canine OA model 20-week follow-up, which is a 3-year equivalent in humans. That data will be out in the first half of calendar year 2023. Some people might say that we know that PPS works well in dogs and horses. Why do another study? This study is done in animals that have natural osteoarthritis. So these are symptomatic animals that are going to their vet. The vet is diagnosing them with osteoarthritis and they're being treated. And again, we're looking at a whole range of measurements and imaging inside the joint. And why that is important is that natural osteoarthritis in a dog is very similar to the osteoarthritis in humans. So we're looking to see how osteoarthritis is tracking in the dogs, and that is then a very nice way of tracking what's happening in humans. So 6 months or 20-week follow-up in dogs gives us a 3-year window into the human case. So it's not an experimental model of osteoarthritis. Sometimes some people say those experimental models, which can be set up by scientists, don't always translate well into the human situation. But in this case, this is natural osteoarthritis. Dogs with symptomatic pain and problems walking will enter into this trial, and it's a really good surrogate for what's happening in the humans. So that's why we're doing that particular study. Also, we'll have data around a preclinical proof of concept study of a mouse model of the acute respiratory distress syndrome mediated by influenza infection. Peer-reviewed manuscripts been done, sent out for publication, we hope first half of 2023. We'll also have some further news about additional intellectual property that's been generated and protected. And we are progressing our commercial discussions on the MPS asset. Now, I have just a word to mention on the MPS asset. So the MPS asset is being largely driven by plexus in those regions of Brazil, Middle East, North Africa and Turkey. They're the hotspots of where the demand is for the product. But it's very important from a futuristic point of view why we go with MPS first. There are some jurisdictions around the world that base pricing of new products that are registered on comparator prices. So they look at what the drug has been priced at previously, and therefore when you bring in the product for the treatment of MPS, you then find that the pricing bodies, the government, will look at that comparator price and then say you can have this price. But if you go with another product which has a lower comparative price, then that sets the price for many future discussions, and it becomes very hard to then say we want to get a much higher price for this rare disease. So going with MPS first is a strategic decision based on setting a comparative price for PPS in a market in an orphan indication, which has always been our desire in regards to partnering with the MPS asset. Next slide, please.